right, here we go. Hello, everyone. Luke Royals here with a pretty important video today. I think this is pretty important. At the very least, it's very exciting. This has to do with Bitcoin. This has to do with the freedom of Julian Assange. For years, you probably have heard the phrase free Assange, free Assange. In this video, I'm going to give the background of who Julian Assange is, what the story is, why he was talking about Bitcoin, why he cared so much about Bitcoin, and what this means for you. How much Bitcoin should you get? Why was Julian Assange so pro-Bitcoin? And now that Julian Assange is free, what is the government telling us about what we should be doing with Bitcoin and how to custody it properly and to keep it secure? So without further ado, let me get into the video here about Julian Assange. So Julian Assange is free. Yes, you read that right. You heard that right. Julian Assange is free. As of a few hours ago, he is free and is currently en route to Australia. He has not landed yet at the time of recording, so I hope and pray that he lands safely, just fine. The Australian government would not allow him to fly commercial. They were having him fly private, and unfortunately, he's having to foot the $500,000 bill. But, but the point is that Assange is free, and there's a massive, massive step here. So let's get into the story of who is Julian Assange and why. So what Julian Assange is important because he exposed massive government conspiracies, in particular, obviously, infamously through Wikileaks in 2010, 2011, in particular, the ones we're going to talk about in this video. And of course, also, Julian Assange, and far fewer people know this, but Julian Assange was begging people to buy Bitcoin when it was 30 cents, a dollar, a couple dollars, okay? He has many, many quotes and many public statements being a pro-Bitcoin advocate. And this is why a lot of people in Bitcoin are very excited today that he has been released, right? So this is the full story of what has happened and how much Bitcoin he bought, how much Bitcoin you should buy, and how to protect yourself in the long-term future so that you can avoid the fate that Julian Assange, unfortunately, has gone through, right? So let's back up. Who's Julian Assange? Julian Assange is an Australian hacker who built Wikileaks along with a few other people in 2006, okay? And this is a site where whistleblowers could remain anonymous and leak, aka WikiLeaks, information and data that was sensitive to governments or corporations, basically just expose corruption, right? Basically, be open source journalism. That's the idea, right? Keep in mind, 2005, 2006, 2007, this is pre-Great Financial Crisis. This is early days of social media, right? Early days of Facebook, early days of YouTube, right? This is very early days, people trying to figure all this out, right? So 2006, WikiLeaks, open source journalism project. Okay, have it be streamlined in a way so that when people leak information, it has the minimal amount of damage possible to the current day events while exposing the maximum amount of information possible, right? So this was 2006, whistleblowers trying to remain anonymous and bring the government secrets to light. And so for years, for about 4 or 5 years, WikiLeaks was exposing many shocking truths around the world, right? From Tibet, China was censoring some Tibetan uprisings. WikiLeaks brought a lot of light to that. There were various human rights violations in a variety of countries and places around the world. WikiLeaks brought light to that. Drone strikes, scams, things in Peru, things around the world, right? It doesn't matter what the government was or where it was, WikiLeaks would expose it. WikiLeaks would, share that information with the world. So that's what Julian Assange was advocating for, okay? But everything changed in 2010 when WikiLeaks became all of a sudden no longer this tiny little pet project in the corner of the internet that very, very few people heard about, to all of a sudden everybody heard about it and everybody had an opinion, even if they had no idea what they're talking about. So everything changed in 2010. What happened in 2010? In 2010, there were hundreds of thousands of classified U.S. documents that were released, okay? The biggest leak in history, over 700,000 documents over the course of a couple years that revealed a lot of horrible things that the United States government either directly did or the United States government indirectly via the Iraqi military did. And this is in both the Iraq and Afghanistan wars. This is in the years prior between, the beginning of the war on terror up to that point, right? Okay, so I'm just going to list through some of the things. Obviously, I'm not going to show any pictures or go into detail at all, but any of this stuff, of course, you can do your imagination of how deep the rabbit hole goes, and the rabbit hole does go quite deep, but this is a cliff notes of what these leaks had in them, okay? There were secret raids done by military members on individuals and civilians. There were executions of entire families, including children. The Iraqi army soldiers were executing detainees and doing other horrible things to them and with them over the course of many, many incidents. Over 65,000 civilian casualties that the U.S. had previously denied in former reports were exposed to light in these WikiLeaks publications of these leaked documents. The Afghan war diary, the Iraqi Iraqi diary also should be in there. I don't think I have it, but there were incidents of helicopter pilots, in particular Apache helicopter pilots, getting clearance to fire upon surrendering combatants, and the excuse there was that if you're surrendering, you can't surrender to an aerial vehicle. So very weak argument there, but lots of documents of not just these people being killed, not just these people surrendering or other, let's say, innocents or prisoners of war being killed, but these people were killed under explicit approval by commanding authorities, right? So that is the big conspiracy here, right? You know, of course, there's always going to be errors when wars occur and people are always going to get caught in the crossfire, but there was a huge outrage by people that this was being greenlit, right? 15,000 civilians were killed in previously classified events. Of course, these became declassified or exposed, leaked with this information. And of course, the Iraqi war logs, there it is. And then, of course, with Guantanamo Bay, there were a lot of interesting things there, including political deals and handshake deals and lots of interesting things with various European countries, the United States, basically exchanging various prisoners from Guantanamo Bay, which in of itself is a very sketchy, deep rabbit hole there. You know, basically being completely eroded of constitutional rights. There was a lot of exposure of the torture and other inhumane methods of interrogation in Guantanamo Bay, and like I say here in the tweet, exchanging between countries for various political favors or political careers, let's say. And so this is a quote I really like of Julian Assange's from 2011. It kind of summarizes the topic here, right? And again, now today, recording this in 2024, June of 2024, this might seem a little obvious to a lot of people. To other people, I don't think it does. But keep in mind, in 2011, this was still very controversial. This was very counter-narrative. This was something that a lot of people called Julian Assange a terrorist, called Julian Assange someone against the state, right? A lot of people, even today, I would think, view Julian Assange as an enemy of the state. And maybe, sure, he is an enemy of the state from the state's eyes. But I think it's important to keep in mind that these people, like Julian Assange, like myself, and many other people that are pro Julian Assange's freedom, are not unpatriotic, are not un-American, are not against, you know, against regulations and against government. It's just against corrupt government, right? And against wanting to make sure, you know, like me personally, you know, I won't speak to Julian Assange's personal beliefs. My personal beliefs is that I'm not saying these things because I want the American government to collapse and I want, you know, the American dream to be over and dead, right? I want these things to be exposed so that there can be more transparency, so there can be more freedom of information, and so that we can have a government that's smaller, yet more deserving of trust, right? I don't really trust the American government now. We'll get into that more in just a moment. The story gets really, really crazy. But back to the quote here, specifically, that Julian Assange had here. Julian Assange, 2011. The quote is, "The goal is not to completely subjugate Afghanistan. The goal is to use Afghanistan to wash money out of the tax bases of the United States, out of the tax bases of European countries, through Afghanistan, and back into the hands of a transnational security elite." That is the goal. The goal is not to have an endless, the goal is to have an endless war, not a successful war. This is the thesis that Assange proposed, and I believe, as well as many people that have read these documents, would agree that these documents are really, really condemning for the United States and allies in the Iraq and Afghanistan wars. Now, there was the most infamous example. Many of you watching probably know what this is, but for those of you that don't, this is the most infamous example of the WikiLeaks publication in you know, the 2010-2011 era. Okay, the most infamous example is a series of videos of American servicemen and women, I think all men, killing multiple journalists from Reuters, as well as locals and children. Reuters had actually been looking for these journalists for 2 years, and there was not yet a conclusive answer as to where they were. The U.S. government denied having any knowledge of where they were. Then, of course, these 700 documents are released, leaked by Manning. We'll get to more Manning in just a moment. And then Julian Assange, via WikiLeaks, publishes the videos, the information, and the report with the videos on WikiLeaks. And, of course, then all of a sudden, we now know where the journalists went. The video is quite horrifying. Obviously, we're not going to show it. We're not going to talk about it. I'll just read this quote here about what Julian Assange said in regards to this, right? So, of course, the top you know, image is from that video, and this is Julian's reaction to that video. He posted his reaction along with the original source material, and this is the quote he says. In this video, I think you can see the corruption of politics and military by war itself, in particular by modern nature of aerial warfare. So you see these young pilots acting like they are playing video games, only the high scores they are getting are with human lives, real human lives, right? That's the quote by Julian Assange. I think that's very, very important. I think exposing these things and talking about these things is really, really critical. Why? Number one, my tax dollars are funding this, your tax dollars are funding this. Number two, even if it is human error, even if it is an oversight or misalignment of or misunderstanding of some sort, there are a lot of things to keep in mind here, right? Technology, I believe, is changing faster than our regulatory framework, and our collective culture and social consciousness is viewing that, right? Again, this leak was from 2011, right? This video is from years prior, okay? A lot has changed in the last decade and a half or so, and now we are seeing leaks, publications of the war between Ukraine and Russia going on right now, of drone strikes there that are equally as, if not more horrifying than this leak from Wikileaks, over a decade ago, right? Now, for context, I'm still here in the Czech Republic right now, the day of recording. I'm here in Prague. It's a beautiful city. I've spent a few days sightseeing over the weekend. Today I'm working, of course, from my apartment, and then, of course, from the beautiful park down the street. And the point of me bringing it up is that Ukraine's not that far away, right? It's not that far away. You know, if I were in the United States, distance-wise, it's like another state. You know, is it like so? It's really not that far away from Eastern Europe, right? And these drone strikes that are happening to both Russian and Ukrainian soldiers in Ukraine are frankly quite terrifying, right? These are not major large drones or Apache helicopters like we saw most predominantly in the Iraq and Afghanistan wars. These are small drones. These are small drones, kind of like you would envision someone flying around with a camera, right? Like any of the small drones that we see videographers or camera people taking videos with, right? These are drones that are only $300, $400, $500, and we see these drones targeting people, targeting tanks and large military equipment, right? We have seen videos of mere $300 to $500 drones taking out $10 million tanks. We have seen these videos of these drones potentially in the near future being powered by AI going after people, right? So these things are quite concerning. And it seems really important that governments address this issue or release information with this issue, or at the very least don't lie to the American public and say, we don't know where these reporters are, when in reality, you killed them yourself, right? So this is the dilemma we're having, right? That essentially we have exponentially increasing technology with governments because they're trying to control the narrative, because they're trying to control media, because they're trying to control their political currency, don't have an incentive to bring all of the trade-offs of those things to light, right? Obviously, we won't go into this rabbit hole too much because this is where we get rapidly more towards opinion, and I think it's justified opinion, but nonetheless, why do we go to war in Afghanistan and Iraq? I would argue in large part it's because of oil, because we had to defend the petrodollar oil standard, for the American dollar and our interests, right? There are many, many other factors too, which again, we won't get into. But when you have a massive monetary incentive towards perpetuating and continuing war, as Julian Assange's previous quote says, an endless war, not a successful war, all of a sudden you are going to see much, much more of this information suppression, like in the case of these two Reuters journalists. It's absolutely terrifying, it's absolutely devastating, and it's incredible that it took so long for someone to release the information. And applause to both Assange and Manning for releasing that, right? But let's get back to the Assange story, okay? And again, for context, everything I'm about to outline is facts, right? Everything I'm about to outline actually happened, okay? This is really important because a lot of people aren't aware that these things happened, okay? What happened after that? Well, over the course of the following time period, Assange had increasing suspicion of being followed, increasing suspicion that the governments of the world were going to take him out, right? A lot of people at the time probably would call him a fearmonger, like, oh, no, he's a journalist. He published information, right? The New York Times, Reuters, Washington Post, they all do that too. You know, why are they going to go after him, right? He had that suspicion. So what he did is he fled to the Ecuadorian embassy in London, in the United Kingdom, right? And he fled there while in disguise, right? He was dressed up like a motorcycle delivery man, right? So he had a whole wig on. He had the eye color changing contact lenses on. He had a whole outfit and garment. He even had a rock in his shoe so that he would walk at a different pace with a with a different kind of limp as his traditional walk, right? It would force him to have the limp without having to pretend, so it was consistent, right? And basically he did all that because he believed he was under direct surveillance, and he believed that at any time he could have been taken out, kidnapped, who knows what, right? And later on that all would come to light, which we'll get to that more in just a moment. But as a side note, again, in regards to exponentially changing technology, what about AI, right? How difficult is it going to be, how difficult is it for a U.S. government agent or any government agent to determine someone's walk or someone's identity from just visual cues, human visual cues, right? How much more difficult is it going to be? Sorry, we have a helicopter in the background. Maybe the government's trying to stop this video. Anyway, how much more difficult is it going to be when we have AI or AI assisted government agents trying to figure out who is who, right? Basically, Assange was perhaps only able to make it to the Ecuadorian embassy because he had a disguise. But how much more difficult are these disguises going to be when the technology to identify those people gets exponentially better, right? So here's the crazy part. Here's where the story gets pretty nuts, okay? Assange then claimed political asylum in the embassy for the following 7 years, okay? Assange did not leave the embassy, the Ecuadorian embassy in London, for 7 years. He didn't leave the building. Now, why is that? Did he do it by choice? No, not really. Okay, the United States wanted to extradite Julian Assange, and so via the UK, lots of police officers were sent to the Ecuadorian embassy. You can see the picture on the screen here. It's insane. The videos are nuts. Like, the whole embassy is just surrounded by this sea of police officers. It's crazy, right? And he was under heavy surveillance the entire time. It wasn't quite this heavy the entire time. He was in those 7 years, but 24/7, 365, the embassy was under surveillance. That basically the UK and the US via the UK looking to see any sign of Assange leaving the embassy, because of course as soon as he left the embassy he was off quote-unquote Ecuadorian soil, and so then he would be captured, arrested, and brought in for questioning, right? So he claimed asylum in the embassy for 7 years, did not leave the building, right? The top left picture you see here is Assange overlooking the police officers and people from a window on a little balcony. The picture on the right, there are lots of videos, of course, of Assange in the embassy over the course of 7 years, right? Security cam footage of him living, exercising, and working from within the embassy, right? And of course, all the police officers at the bottom, just showing an example of all that was going on. Now, I didn't mention this in the Twitter thread, but there's another whole rabbit hole here. There are a lot of other charges that were brought against Assange, rape charges and sexual assault charges, in the years while he was in there. And obviously there's a lot of rumors and thoughts there. The main important thing to understand when it comes to that whole side tangent and rabbit hole is that a lot of charges completely not related to the WikiLeaks charges were being brought up against Assange, right? And so some people would say, oh, they're legitimate, and so Assange is a bad person. Other people would say, oh, they're not legitimate because they're government psyops. They were there to help to force more governments to get Assange out of the embassy, right? This was all pressure, right? And I think no matter what you believe, if they're actually true or not, I personally have my own suspicions, but whether you think they're true or not, the content or moral character of Assange is irrelevant. The point is, you don't have this many police officers, you don't have this much government force for charges that are, in the eyes of the law, perceived as much more minor, right? That's just the reality of how it is, right? Clearly, the amount of police force in correlation with the charges claimed is not equivalent, right? Now, let's get back to politics, because this is really important. This has to do with something that you probably remember, especially if you're in America, the 2016 presidential election, right? Okay, so Assange has been in the embassy for years now. He has not left the Ecuadorian embassy in London, in London, UK. And even within the walls of the embassy, he's still working. He's still exposing stuff, right? WikiLeaks is not done. They're still exposing conspiracies. They're still exposing stuff, right? Okay, so 2016, specifically October 2016, okay, barely a month before the elections, okay, between presidential candidate, or then presidential candidate Donald Trump and presidential candidate Hillary Clinton, right? So from within the walls of the embassy, Assange, aka WikiLeaks, or WikiLeaks via Assange, they continue to publish, right? And one of the things they published, this is one of the most infamous things they've also published, is numerous emails leaked between the Hillary, or from the Hillary Clinton campaign, and campaign managers and other people. There is some rumor and evidence to support that Russian hackers and Russian people were also involved. And so this is kind of where this whole Russian hacker, all these other conspiracies and other tangents really kind of emerge from, right? That basically, is it possible that these Russian hackers were undermining the Clinton campaign and getting those emails because they would have preferred to have Trump elected into office? And then, was Julian Assange assisting the Russian hackers by then posting it? A lot of other side tangents here. But the point is, the thing we know is that Clinton had the emails. Somebody got the emails, maybe let's say the Russians do the emails, and then Assange is posting them, right? He's still posting, doing all this work. And so whatever the case, even if Julian Assange is in no way assisting the actual leak of information, but purely only publishing the information, whatever the case, the Democrats and general political left of the American system now begins to distrust him. They now begin to dislike him, right? I mean, again, keep in mind, the big global news story of WikiLeaks so far in WikiLeaks history has been that of exposing the Iraq and Afghanistan wars, right? And so, since typically, or generally speaking, people on the right side of the political aisle, right? Bush was in president at the time, a Republican president. Generally speaking, the majority of pushback and resistance against Assange was from the right, from the political right, from the Republicans. And the Democrats, while there are many Democrats on record saying absolutely horrible things, about Assange and, things that frankly are complete violations of freedom of speech, in general, there was a much more right-leaning, Republican-leaning, conservative-leaning in America disdain towards Assange. But with this new email leak, that really, changed or escalated the negative tone from the left to disliking Assange. All of a sudden, people are claiming that Julian Assange is a Russian agent, a Russian spy, that he's trying to undermine U.S. elections, that he's a threat to our democracy, quote unquote, all of these things, right? And so while previously Assange had received strongest condemnation from the right side of the political aisle for exposing these crimes of the wars, primarily, not entirely, but primarily led by Republicans, now the exposure of the Clinton emails made Assange an increasingly massive target from the left as well, right? And so here are two quotes to give, just a summarization of this point, right? So while Trump was a presidential candidate on the campaign trail, he was saying, I love WikiLeaks. WikiLeaks is great. He on record 3, 4, 5 times or so on the campaign trail at his podium, talking to people, offhand comments, whatever, was generally pro Assange, pro WikiLeaks, right? And again, it's primarily because Assange posted the emails. He posted the information a month before the election. I mean, how could Trump not like him, right? Basically, Assange, in no small part, is being a massive part of the narrative that helps Trump win, right? Simultaneously, Hillary Clinton, of course, obviously, has massive disdain and massive dislike and distrust of Assange, right? Is strictly condemning him. And WikiLeaks, one of the quotes that she gave is that the United States strongly condemns the illegal disclosure of declassified information. That's a quote from her. Of course, she was saying that more in regards to Iraq and Afghanistan, when she was Secretary of State beforehand. But still, now that these emails have been released, she dislikes him even more, right? And so the point is that this is kind of the political narrative shifting around Julian Assange. But it changes. It changes. It gets very interesting because once Trump became president of the United States, WikiLeaks and Assange, via WikiLeaks, drops a massive leak of the CIA during the Trump administration, right? Specifically on cyber warfare, otherwise called Vault 7. That's a whole rabbit hole we won't go down. But despite Trump, this is the important part, despite Donald Trump previously praising Assange on WikiLeaks, all of a sudden, now he doesn't like Assange anymore. Now he's quoted as saying, I know nothing about WikiLeaks. It's not my thing. That's a quote from then President Trump, right? And so, okay, what I'm about to say might sound a little crazy, but just stay with me the next 60 seconds, okay? So despite Donald Trump previously liking Assange and saying positive things about Assange, and then backing away and saying, I don't know anything about WikiLeaks, it's not my thing, during the Trump presidency, the CIA, again, during his presidency, quote-unquote, requested various options to get rid of the Assange problem, okay? One option was kidnapping Assange from the embassy. Another one was just direct assassination, and the other one was shooting down his plane, right? Now, that's a really big deal, okay? Imagine if me, an American citizen, went to the, let's say I'm an American citizen and America's government no longer wants to protect me, and I'm here in Prague, Czech Republic right now. And so I decide to go to the Panama embassy here in Prague, whatever. I don't know if there is one. That's not the point. That's not the point I'm making. Then all of a sudden, China says, oh, We don't like that Luke Broyles guy. He keeps talking about Bitcoin. Ooh, we don't like the Bitcoins because we're the Chinese Communist Party, right? Let's figure out a way to assassinate Luke Broyles, an American citizen, in the embassy of Prague. Wait. All of a sudden, now you're talking about one nation, one sovereign nation, assassinating a citizen of a different nation while claiming political asylum on legally the ground of another nation. All of a sudden, you're not only violating one nation, you have just a complete cluster of stuff going on, right? And that's essentially what is happening here, right? That the CIA obviously did not pursue this, thank God, and maybe they didn't take this that seriously, but it was exposed that this was a legitimate discussion being had even in the high-ranking official levels of the Trump administration, right? That the CIA was not opposed to these things, at least at first, right? That they were considering kidnapping him from foreign soil as he's claiming political asylum, or flat out killing him. And frankly, right now, he's in the air right now. Julian Assange is en route right now back to Australia in the plane, in his plane. And so that's something that I really hope 3, 4, 5, whatever hours from now, we hear he's landed in Australia and landed safely. I think he's going to Bangkok for a layover or something. But anyway, the point is, it's crazy. You don't need a conspiracy theory. You don't need any sort of, hidden agenda. It's just the facts are there, right? The CIA was doing this stuff. It was leaked, okay, by the same guy that was leaking on Clinton before, that was leaking on Obama, that was leaking on Bush. Okay, the guy is pretty consistent and leaking on everybody, right? And so he is very good at making enemies with everyone, right? And so this is the long story short, what happened during the Trump presidency. Now, things began to escalate. They began to change a lot in 2019. Why? Because something very similar happened. Guess what? Julian Assange, Wikileaks, does another leak. He leaks something on the Ecuadorian president, the new president of Ecuador. He leaks something on them. And of course, all of a sudden, Ecuador decides, via the president, they decide, we're kind of tired of having you on our embassy, eating our food, taking up our space, and, having our political goodwill for the last 7 years when both the UK and the US are getting pretty mad that you're still in our embassy. Oh no, now you're leaking on us too? We're going to kick you out. So that's precisely what happens. The Ecuadorian embassy kicks Assange out of the embassy. And so after 7 years, he finally leaves the building. He finally leaves the embassy, right? And he's carried out on his stomach by an entourage of officials. Okay, this picture here is the slightly comical, slightly absurd, slightly just flat out ridiculous picture of 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 or 7 guys, all carrying Julian Assange out, handcuffed on his belly towards a car where he is immediately arrested. And again, arrested for what? We'll get to that more in just a minute, okay? And this guy in the bottom right picture kind of having a smirk. I don't really know what that's all about. But anyway, the point is that since this happened in 2019, Julian Assange has been captive outside of London, about 45 minutes away. And it's common speculation that Julian was refused medical treatment. It's also rumored that his health has been in dramatic decline. Why? Because he's been in isolation 23 hours a day for over 1,900 days. Okay, 1,901 days since he was released this morning. But that's basically where Julian Assange's story has stopped for the last few years. He's been waiting the UK courts to decide if they're going to extradite Julian Assange to the United States or if they're going to let him go. It seems like today that they let him go. There's a lot of the nuance. I know there's a lot of other stuff. I'm oversimplifying here. Please, for the people in the comments, understand. I can only make the video so long. The rabbit hole, I can only cover so much, right? So why does this matter to you? What does this have to do with Bitcoin? What does this have to do with your political views? What does this have to do with the freedom of the press and freedom of speech? Why does this matter? Okay, the individual who released the original classified documents to WikiLeaks was Manning, okay? Manning was sentenced to 35 years in prison. Okay, Manning had security clearance. Manning violated the security clearance. Manning went to jail for violating security clearance. Okay, very straightforward, right? Manning downloads hundreds of thousands of documents, gives them to a journalist, gives them to a publicist publishes them, okay? Very straightforward, right? Not Assange. Okay, there are 18 counts. The Trump administration's 2018 case against Assange, he's given 18 counts. And the critical one to understand is the Espionage Act. Right now, I didn't mention this in the thread. Some of the other counts are legitimate criticisms of Assange, right? There's some criticisms that potentially Assange assisted Manning in infiltrating those government documents. And if that's the case, then Assange is likely to spend years in jail. But we're only talking about 5 years or so sentence here, right? For those hacking assistants, right? And by the way, he wasn't successful at doing that, right? They weren't successful. The real question is towards the latter half, or really the latter third of those 18 counts against Julian Assange. This is where things get really, really sketchy and really, really important, okay? The Espionage Act, what is that? It was passed in 1917 during World War I. It was designed to punish Americans who gave U.S. secrets to foreign nations, right? Obviously, we're in a war, right? You don't want Americans being spies, aka espionage, okay, to foreign nations and assisting foreign nations in killing American troops and undermining American interests, right? Obviously, this is all, pretty straightforward, right? Okay, and again, this is a law designed for the American servicemen, designed for employees of the American government, right? Manning broke those laws and served for those laws, okay? Assange did not. Assange did not have the leak. Assange published the information from the leak. Assange was not an employee of the United States, unlike Manning. Assange was an independent, separate journalist from Australia, okay? It's like having the Espionage Act for American employees, and specifically in a time of war, or at least that's what it is like, leveraging the Espionage Act in some vague way and applying it to this journalist that you don't like, that expose things you didn't like. It's a huge line that is crossed, right? Assange is not and never was an American employee and did not leak any information himself. He might have helped Manning in some specific hacks with passwords, in which case he would serve 5 years for that. But again, we're talking about something 15 years ago. He was in the embassy for 7 years. He was outside of London in a different kind of isolation imprisonment for another 5 years. And still, only today is he returning home to Australia, right? So Manning knowingly took the fall for releasing documents, right? Manning knew that in doing this, I'm going to be violating my security clearance. I'm probably going to jail over this. But Manning believed, I have to release these documents. I have to show the world. And I'm going to choose Wikileaks, this open source internet project, to release the information, right? So why was Assange targeted? Because he is a repeated choke point of being an inconvenience to the government, of exposing some of America's secrets over the last decade or so. He was a continued choke point that these people that were retrieving this leaked information were consistently going to him because they knew he was going to post it, no matter their political affiliation, no matter how condemning the documents were, okay, no matter how extensive they were. They knew he was going to post it, right? They went to him because he knew he would post on anybody, right? Left, right, conservative, Democrat, big nation, small nation, private corporation, public, government sector, whatever it is, they knew he would post it, right? They kept going to him, and he became this kind of choke point. And that's why the governments continue to go after him, right? And so the charge explicitly, in the documents, I won't get into it, but the charge explicitly says Assange communicated the documents to all the world by publishing them on the internet, okay? That is Assange's crime, okay? Specifically, we're talking about counts 15 to 17, okay? The crime is publishing information, okay? That is the crime that Julian Assange is convicted of, right, by the U.S. government. That's why they want him extradited from the U.K., right? So simply put, the U.S. government is leveraging and has been leveraging laws directed towards American servicemen in particular times of war to intimidate a non-U.S. citizen journalist on the crime of journalism, publishing information that was leaked to him, right? The lines here are intentionally vague, which then opens the door for any journalist of any country to be viewed in a similar light, okay? And people might think I'm fear-mongering here. People might think that this is an over-hyperbole or exaggeration here, but it's very true, right? How many journalists are self-censoring as a result of Assange being an example, the example of Edward Snowden or Ross Ulbricht being examples, right? In the last 10 years, how many people have refrained from publishing stuff for fear of being targeted with the Espionage Act, right? So many of the leaks published from 2010, 2011, right, these initial, leaked documents that WikiLeaks posted, right, they were also published by New York Times reporters. They were also published by others, right? And of course, once WikiLeaks posts it, many other publications, many other news sources also were posting that story, right? And so all of a sudden, if you're going to cross this line and you're going to use the Espionage Act as this bridge of going into this vague territory where all of a sudden journalists that post or leaked information are also assigned with, being the ones that leak the information themselves, all of a sudden you cross a very, very big boundary where, okay, now do we target the New York Times journalists? Do we target the Washington Post journalists? Do we target these journalists or that journalist? Just any journalist ever that gets an anonymous tip from someone high up in the government ever. Are they now also an espionage? Are they also now an enemy of the state? Do they also need to be extradited to the United States, even if they've never been an American citizen and aren't an American employee? This is the real problem of Julian Assange's case, and this is why this matters. There are many other things that also matter to a much lesser degree from just the global world journalism, but this is what we're talking about right now. What has happened today? Assange has pled guilty in exchange of being freed, right? And this headline, I think, says it very accurately from the Washington Post. The United States says Julian Assange is no journalist, quote unquote. Here's why that shouldn't matter. And I fully agree with this article. It's a few years old from the Washington Post, but I fully agree. It shouldn't matter, right? And so, as of this morning, the time of recording, Assange has been granted bail and is likely in the air right now. There are people currently tracking his flight. It's a private airline. He wasn't allowed to go public. Again, he's having to shell out $500,000 for this. But it's currently on the route to Australia, right? And so a political victory has been achieved. Thank you to the UK High Court. I think you did the right thing with the information that I've been given. It seems like you've clearly done the right thing and let him go. But however, the question for you watching us and for all of us is, how do we prevent political crimes in the future? Okay, a decade and a half of Julian Assange's life was stolen. And frankly, the trip's not over for him yet, right? He's probably got many more years of legal battles and massive, heavy financial toll ahead of him, right? It's not like it's magically over for him, right? It's just not realistic, right? And how many other journalists are now self-censoring of the fear of becoming the new Julian Assange, right? So how do we prevent these political crimes from happening in the future? The best tool we could possibly have is reducing political incentive from doing so at all, right? Like, if you want to naively believe that we can elect people into power that are not sinful, that are not corrupt, that are perfect, righteous, wonderful human beings that will never do any wrong because they love us. Like, okay, even if you were right and you're wrong, but even if you were right and you had your goody two-shoes wonderful politician in charge, what happens when they're replaced by someone else? Or what happens when some lobbyist comes in? When you take a large enough financial incentive on a long enough time horizon, the inevitability of corruption is 100%, okay? The best tool we have for reducing the probability of these political crimes is introducing an apolitical tool that then becomes that large enough incentive over a longer period of time, that because it's apolitical, does not succumb to the failings of a political system, specifically a political currency system, political monetary distortion, right? And Bitcoin is the critical de-escalator of this corruption and of this incentive and of this war for the state, okay? And Assange knew this, okay? And this is where we get to the Bitcoin number go up hopium type stuff of the video, right? Okay, so far this video has been pretty just straight facts informative, which, by the way, this Twitter thread that we're looking at here is one of my worst performing ones of, I think, ever. And, you know, people ask me, Luke, why do you always have number go up, clickbait, whatever stuff in your videos? It's because you don't watch it. If I don't, right? I mean, this is one of the most important stories in all of journalism in the last decade, and nobody cares because it's not Bitcoin going to 5 million in the title or whatever, right? It's just people don't care, right? But the point is, the story matters, and Julian Assange is a pretty vocal Bitcoiner, especially from the early days, right? As early as 2010, WikiLeaks was accepting donations in Bitcoin, right? Okay, it's crazy, right? And actually, Satoshi Nakamoto, the creator of Bitcoin, was in communication with Julian Assange and about the WikiLeaks events, okay? And you know, and a little more elaboration on that, okay? The price of Bitcoin was 30 cents when Satoshi Nakamoto wrote about WikiLeaks, quote unquote, kicking the hornet's nest, okay? And then Satoshi disappeared less than 24 hours later, okay? To read the exact quote of what Satoshi said, he said, "It would have been nice to get this attention to Bitcoin in any other context. WikiLeaks has kicked the hornet's nest and the swarm is headed toward us," right? Now, why is this? Again, it's because WikiLeaks was accepting Bitcoin donations because Julian Assange was an early Bitcoin supporter and fan. And so when, of course, the United States government started really going after Julian Assange and WikiLeaks, of course, Satoshi realized, oh my goodness, we have all this influence coming towards us, right? And I didn't include this in the thread, but Satoshi actually was asking Julian Assange, Julian, please stop talking about Bitcoin so much. Bitcoin is too young. It's too early. Its price is only 30 cents. Okay, keep in mind the network is barely a year and a half old at the time. Mere months ago, the core devs were still finding bugs in the code. Bitcoin is a very, very young open source project. And Julian, if you keep bringing all this media attention to literally the biggest new journalism story of the decade and potentially the next decade, you're gonna hurt Bitcoin. You're gonna undermine the very project you understand, right? So that's a whole email discussion between them. It's really interesting. That's a story for another day. I was really fortunate while here in Prague, barely a week ago, to sit down with Adam Back. I got to hang out with him for a little while, and then during that time, we also were able to do a quick little podcast recording together. It was very nice. He's such a nice guy, very humble. Thanks, Adam, for all the work you've done. For the two people watching this don't know, Adam Back, the guy who made Hashcash, basically invented proof of work, which is one of the components that Bitcoin uses. Basically, Adam is one of the only people still in Bitcoin today that was around in Bitcoin, quote unquote, well over a decade before any of us were, right? Adam Back was a Bitcoiner a decade before Bitcoin existed, right? And so the point is, when I sat down with Adam and we talked about Satoshi Nakamoto's identity, this is something that Adam confirmed to me. He confirmed that the importance of Satoshi's disappearance is critical to the survival of Bitcoin, okay? Nakamoto's identity remains a mystery today, okay? Both because we don't want Bitcoin to become a target, like I was describing a moment ago when Satoshi was pleading to Julian Assange to not keep talking about Bitcoin. But also, frankly, it's for Satoshi's benefit, right? Like, Satoshi didn't want to, be in the limelight. Satoshi did not want to be the next Assange, right? Okay, in 2010, Bitcoin was small enough that perhaps it could have been destroyed, right? Maybe it was a low chance, but most people in Bitcoin at the time understood Bitcoin could be destroyed, right? It was so small, so tiny, so few users. The mining hash was so small, right? So tiny. Now, by late 2011, some would say early 2012, by about that time, it got large enough that many, including myself, would argue that's about the time it reached escape velocity. But whatever the case, the important thing to understand is that when Julian Assange was talking about Bitcoin and accepting Bitcoin donations, Satoshi and the Bitcoin original holders asked him, please don't do this. We're still working on these bugs. We're still working on this. If we throw it onto, headline news, it's going to, perhaps cause a lot of problems that we don't, that we aren't ready to handle, right? And so that's one of the reasons why Julian Assange in later years backed down in this pro-Bitcoin stance. Obviously, he's still pro-Bitcoin today. Many of his family members are outspoken Bitcoiners. Here in Prague just last week, Julian Assange's wife, Stella Assange, was here speaking on stage. It was a pleasure to see her and to see her speak. I don't know if at the time she had any insight, if Julian Assange's freedom was as close around the corner. But, and then back in March, I was in Sydney, Australia, and Julian's brother was there. So his family is very outspoken in Bitcoin. They go to the Bitcoin conferences. They're here at the Bitcoin conferences. So definitely still a Bitcoiner, but Assange definitely became less outspoken as a Bitcoiner once Satoshi said these things, right? And again, critics of Bitcoin will complain about Bitcoin and say, oh my goodness, why did Satoshi Nakamoto disappear? That's so sketchy. That's so crazy. Oh, that's so, mysterious. That's so bad. Oh, Bitcoin needs a face. Bitcoin needs somebody to talk to. The whole point of Bitcoin is that it's open source, that there's no single person in charge, right? Even if Satoshi reappeared today, Satoshi cannot turn off Bitcoin. He cannot stop Bitcoin. He cannot rewrite Bitcoin. He cannot redirect mining hash to Bitcoin. The most Satoshi could hope to do is via narrative and his own propaganda, convert people to some bad upgrade of Bitcoin's protocol, which even that wouldn't kill Bitcoin. It would just have people go off to Satoshi's new version of Bitcoin or whatever, right? So the point is, Satoshi doesn't have any power over Bitcoin. And likewise, critics might ask, why did Satoshi disappear? Julian Assange is why, okay? Again, this comment that Satoshi made about Wikileaks kicking the hornet's nest was made less than a day before his disappearance, right? Satoshi disappeared after that and never returned, okay? He probably disappeared, again, both on the selfish interest that I don't want to become the new Assange, but then also probably for the sake of the network, that he decided, now is a good time. I spent years before Bitcoin's initial release, the white paper, October 31st, 2008, and then the Genesis block of January 3rd, 2009. I spent years working on this beforehand. I spent a good amount of time, the first year and a half or so, helping core devs work out bugs, doing this, mining on my own. He mined 1 million coins himself. He's doing all that stuff. And then he decided, now's probably a good time to let Bitcoin go, let go of the training wheels and let this bicyclist go on its own, right? So, and this is a quote Adam Back told me. I was wearing the same sweater, actually, funny enough. And this is something he said to me just barely over a week ago at the conference. Adam Back told me, we shouldn't want to know who Satoshi is, nor should we help people who are trying to find the breadcrumbs. Now, Adam Back personally believes there are no breadcrumbs. I think there are some breadcrumbs, but we won't get into that right now. Let's get back to Bitcoin. Okay, what did Julian Assange say about Bitcoin? Why is Bitcoin important? Okay, let's get back to the quotes here. Okay, here are some quotes that Julian Assange said about Bitcoin. And now, again, these are mostly from the early days of Bitcoin. Okay, these are mostly from around the time and slightly before Satoshi asked Julian Assange to stop talking about Bitcoin. These are some of the quotes Julian Assange said. All freedom-loving people should support Bitcoin as an answer to government oppression. Bitcoin is the real Occupy Wall Street. For those who don't know, Occupy Wall Street is the big protest and movement that occurred in the wake of the Great Financial Crisis and in reaction to government corruption at bailing out the big banks. Julian Assange also said, I really like Bitcoin. I own Bitcoins. Bitcoin is a way to get around the governmental financial quote-unquote blockades. And then perhaps my favorite quote of Julian's about Bitcoin, my deepest thanks to the U.S. government, Senator John McCain, and Senator Lieberman for pushing Visa, MasterCard, PayPal, American Express, money bookers, etc. into erecting an illegal banking blockade against Wikileaks starting in 2010. It caused us to invest in Bitcoin with over a 50,000% return. Very funny, right? And of course, this gets to a larger point that Bitcoiners say all the time, including Michael Saylor when he was on stage here in Prague just last week with his keynote about Bitcoin, is that you only buy Bitcoin when you need it, right? Julian Assange was one of the first public advocates about Bitcoin on the global main stage because Julian Assange was one of the first people that needed Bitcoin, right? Why does Michael Saylor own Bitcoin now when he did not in 2013? It's because Michael Saylor did not need Bitcoin in 2013. Now, in 2020, now 2024, Michael Saylor needed Bitcoin because his company MicroStrategy was going to die. It was going to go under if he didn't do something radical, and the radical thing he chose was adopt Bitcoin. And likewise with Julian Assange. Julian Assange and WikiLeaks could not get donations via American Express or PayPal or MasterCard, all these other things. And so Julian Assange, ironically, jokingly, is thanking these politicians for censoring him because it helped him find Bitcoin sooner. Again, Bitcoin was under $1 at the time of many of these quotes, right? And likewise with Michael Saylor, Michael Saylor gives a lot of thanks to the fact that his company, MicroStrategy, was having trouble, right? Because it's what helped him find Bitcoin and adopt a Bitcoin standard, right? And of course, his stock is up by a factor of, what, 20? 30? Some absurd number since he adopted the Bitcoin standard, okay? So why is Bitcoin important? It's because political currency, specifically the dollar we're talking about here, is backed by political might, aka the military, which is why the nation must always have a growing army to defend the growing honeypot of said political currency, okay? What is one of the reasons why America needs to have an ever-expanding military to the rest of the world, to foreign bases, is because we have to enforce our will onto the rest of the world to defend the political currency that is the US dollar. We need a big gun to defend our political currency so we can dump that currency onto them. And the less enticing that currency becomes, the bigger the gun has to be to entice people to still use that currency, right? And this is why, unfortunately, as political currencies decline, there is an increasing exponential incentive to war. The greater the people resist the currency and don't want the currency because nobody else wants the currency because it keeps falling and falling and falling in value and prices keep skyrocketing, the more military you have to have, the more war spending you have to have, the bigger gun you have to have, because if you don't have the barrel of a gun enforcing the political currency, the people willingly are not going to choose it because the free market is something else. It's gold or oil. It's something else people want. It's not the political currency itself. This is why wars are heavily correlated and causated by the decline of fiat currencies. It's a horrible cycle that continues and perpetuates throughout the entirety of human history. Is there going to be war in the future? Yeah, probably. But one of the single best technological solutions we have at reducing the incentive towards war is an apolitical solution. It is Bitcoin, okay? Bitcoin is backed by an endless cap of electricity production pouring into a computer algorithm designed to constrain all of that electricity within a 21 million unit accounting system. That is Bitcoin. With the US political currency, aka the US dollar, the incentive of the US government is borrow, borrow, borrow forever, debase the dollars forever, force the dollar to be worth less forever, to erode the value of the debt in real terms. And we have to enforce all this by holding the world barrels of guns and enforcing them to give us their oil. And in exchange, we give them our dollars that we print on thin air, right? That's how we get your energy without actually going to war and shooting you. Is, oh, we're not going to war with you. We're just pointing a gun at you and telling you to accept our dollars that we're printing on thin air. Now give us your oil, right? That's essentially what happens here, right? And so that's why Bitcoin is really important. That's why Julian Assange, all the way back when Bitcoin was less than $1, was extremely pro-Bitcoin. Some would argue, like Satoshi, too much so, right? Now let's get to the part of the video that is the clickbait, right? Again, it's very frustrating to me that one of the critiques people when they watch my videos have is that, oh, Luke, you're all about number go up. Luke, you're all about clickbait. Luke, you only care about price. I actually don't really care about Bitcoin price. I don't care if it's $50,000, $80,000, or $300,000 or $30 million. I don't really care. Obviously, it's going up. Obviously, I want it to go up. Although I also want it to stay down so I can buy more. But the point is, I actually don't really care that much about fiat price. But people care about it, right? Most people aren't going to click on this video. This video is not going to be my most popular video because it's about things that people don't care about, like freedom and like freedom speech and like human rights, things people don't care about, right? What people care about is the number go up. So let's give you all some number go up. And by the way, if you're watching this far in the video, please like this video, subscribe to this video, show the algorithm that this is an important video because the algorithm's not going to do me any favors with this video, right? People don't click on this because they don't care, because they don't understand why Julian Assange's story matters to them. And I'm trying to make this video to help people understand why it does matter to them and connect it to the number go up arguments so that people hopefully will watch us. So let's talk about that. How much Bitcoin you need? Are you too late to Bitcoin? I would say no. Why? There are 2.1 quadrillion Satoshis in the Bitcoin network, okay? There's 21 million Bitcoin, 100 million Satoshis per Bitcoin, 2.1 quadrillion Satoshis. Okay, that's all you need to know. 2.1 quadrillion monetary units within Bitcoin's system, within Bitcoin's network. How many is that per human being? About 230,000. That might sound like a lot. It's actually not. It's way less, okay? That is about $133 worth of Bitcoin this morning at the time of recording when Julian Assange is released. You can buy more Satoshis than the average person will ever have for $133. And actually, I would argue that's extremely pessimistic. That's extremely conservative. Because realistically, most people are going to have way less than 50,000 Satoshis. The reason why is simple. The world is not an even distribution. The world is a Pareto distribution. I own way more than 240,000 Satoshis. Most of you watching this own way more than 240,000 Satoshis. And every 230,000 Satoshis extra you buy and I buy, that means one less person gets that number, right? And so the average for everyone that doesn't yet have Bitcoin goes down, right? And this is just how the world works. Some people in the long-term future will have 1,000 Bitcoin. Other people will have 20 Bitcoin. Other people will have 5 Bitcoin. Some people will have 1 Bitcoin, and the majority of people will have 1 million sats or less, and the vast majority of people will have way less than 100,000 sats. This is just how the world is, okay? Musical talent is not distributed evenly, okay? Age and health and genetics, these things are not distributed evenly, right? Nothing in the world is distributed evenly, and you could complain about all you want, but that's just the reality. Some people are going to own thousands of Bitcoin, and that inherently means that 230,000 sats, even distribution for every human being on the planet, that's just simply not going to work. Oh, by the way, what about AI bots? What about when in 50 years there's 100 million AI bots or 100 billion AI bots all working economically in digital cyberspace for humans, right? Instead of 100 million human lawyers, you have 100 billion AI bot lawyers. They're doing all the work times 1,000 that all the humans could have ever done, right? All of a sudden, all the economic productivity of those AIs and all of that future technology also somehow has to fit into Bitcoin's network. Why? Because electricity is absorbing a larger share of the global energy grid. And what do AIs need? They need electricity. What is the one commodity that's directly exchangeable for electricity because it has a direct electrical cost 24/7, 365 for all time? It's Bitcoin, right? The AIs don't need NVIDIA stock to survive. They need Bitcoin to survive. The AIs of the future are not going to trust NVIDIA stock or any AI stock. Why? Because human beings control those things. AIs aren't going to trust humans. Why? Because humans are going to program into the AIs to not trust humans. Why? Because it's obvious. An apolitical system is inherently more trustworthy than a political system, okay? Once you see it, it's very simple to understand. But the point is, even 50,000 sats is probably way too conservative. It's probably a way lower number. But let's stick with 50,000 sats. How expensive is that today, June of 2024, the morning Julian Assange is released? $29. For the cost of dinner, you can probably buy more than a lifetime's worth of Bitcoin for the coming decades from now, right? You can buy a lifetime's worth of purchasing power in 2060, 70, or 80 for the cost of a dinner today in 2024. That is how early you are to Bitcoin, okay? You are not late to Bitcoin just because you didn't buy it in 2010 when Julian Assange was pounding the table at 30 cents per Bitcoin, okay? The design of Bitcoin is to be a free market to perpetually absorb the monetary premium of political currencies, as well as absorb the technological progress from future currencies, right? See, this is the problem with political currency. As we innovate more technology, what does political currency do? It absorbs and cannibalizes that political energy, right? Funneling up to the rich, so the rich get rich, and while the poor also get rich, the rich get rich at a faster rate by exploiting the poor, right? And so what Bitcoin does is it distributes those prosperity gains equitably to everyone in the network without having increasingly centralized political control, right? Okay, there's no upside limit to that idea, right? Basically, when you're buying Bitcoin, you're buying all the monetary premium of all the current money, plus all the premium of future productivity. And that dwarfs all current money by a factor of 2, 10, 100, 10,000. Some really big number that we can't possibly conceive of, right? Okay, so again, let me say that again. Julian Assange, early Bitcoin adopter, legendary journalist, historical figure in the early 21st century here, was pro-Bitcoin way before it was a dollar. He was so OG to Bitcoin. He was so original to Bitcoin. He was so early to Bitcoin that he was in conversation with Satoshi freaking Nakamoto, and Julian was probably one of the sole reasons at which Satoshi disappeared. That's how early Julian Assange was. But you today are not too late. It's still early because most people don't understand this. Most people don't have any clue what on earth I'm talking about. Most people aren't clicking on this video. They're too distracted by the sports game, or they're too distracted by which color to vote this upcoming November election cycle in America, right? It's going to be absolute chaotic political bloodbath. It's going to be entertaining to watch it all implode. But most people are so early. You're early Bitcoin because most people are so clueless about what's going on, right? Most people don't know anything about this Julian Assange story. Most people don't even know who Julian Assange is. Most people think Julian Assange is a freaking terrorist, right? This is my point. You are still early to Bitcoin, okay? $29 worth of Bitcoin is 50,000 sats. Realistically, there are probably way less than 50,000 sats per person. An apolitical monetary system is worth far more than a political monetary system, okay? A political, quote-unquote, truth system is worth way less than an apolitical truth system. Why? Because the political truth system is always going to be telling you the truth from their spin of propaganda of their political will. The truth system, without the politics involved, is always going to be more accurate, right? It's like comparing a meter stick to the length of my arm when we're determining measure, right? Of course, the meter stick is objectively going to be worth more because the meter stick is actually just an equation based on the speed of light. My arm is a complete political will at whatever I want. If I want the length of measurement today to be a little longer, I'll stretch out my arm a little bit more. If I want it to be shorter, I'll shorten my arm. If I really want it to be shorter, I'll chop off my fingers, right? I will do whatever necessary to manipulate the length of measure of distance to my political advantage. An apolitical system that measures something is inherently worth more than a political system that measures something, right? Okay, Bitcoin is up by a factor of 200,000 since Julian Assange started talking about Bitcoin in 2010 publicly, okay? There's no talk for truth in terms of lies. I believe that at the Christian level, I believe that at the practical level, and I believe at the monetary level. I believe it in every way. Truth is always priceless when you're pricing in terms of lies. Bitcoin is not stopping at a 200,000x. People at 30 cents thought they were too late, okay? Max Kaiser, other Bitcoin OG, thought he was too late when Bitcoin was 30 cents because Trace Mayer was buying it when it was 10 cents, okay? My friend Larry Lepard, he thought it was too late at $3 because it was 30 cents before. People at $30, like Jimmy Song, thought they were too late. Jimmy Song's also an OG. He didn't start buying it until like $40 or $60. He didn't really go heavy until it was $80 or so, but he thought he was too late because it was once $3. And people at $300 thought they were too late. And likewise, people at $30,000 thought they were too late. And now we're at $70,000 or something like that. I don't even know. I think Bitcoin went down a little bit. I think we're under 60. I think we're at like $59,000 per Bitcoin right now. Like, you're still early. Yes, Bitcoin's up by a factor of 200,000 since people were pounding the table telling you what to do. But it's going to go up by another 200,000, right? Why? Because we've gone from 1 in a million people owning Bitcoin to now like 1 in 10,000 or something, 1 in 1,000 or 1 in 5,000, some silly, stupidly no number, right? Like, there are still massive returns in front of us. In fact, I would argue that the majority of wealth purchasing power to Bitcoin is in front of us, not behind us. I think there's more money to be made in front of us than behind us. I just believe that personally. Metcalfe law, Gresham's law, all that stuff. But this is the point. You're not too late to Bitcoin. This is why the Julian Assange story matters. This is why you have to think about these things, right? That if you're an optimist on the future, and right now I'm feeling pretty freaking optimistic, right? Julian Assange is currently en route to Australia. I'm feeling pretty good, right? Yes. Free Assange. Yes. Donald Trump's talking about Ross Ulbricht. Yes. Edward Snowden. Yes. Yes. These things are good. I'm an optimist. If you're a pessimist watching this, you should probably go into hiding. I mean, seriously, what are you gonna do? You're gonna hold dollars. You're gonna go to your little farm and you're gonna collect seeds and guns and gas and live in a bunker and wait for the apocalypse, for the credit system to collapse and the hyperinflation in the world. Like you're waiting for World War III. Really, you're a pessimist. That's what you're doing. I mean, come on, you're gonna outsmart the AIs. You're going to outsmart the central bank digital currency coming after you. If you're a pessimist and you're watching this and you think Bitcoin's a stupid scam that's going to be compromised and you think all these other things because you're scared, I get it. I empathize with you. It's scary, okay? Julian Assange wasn't a U.S. citizen, yet he served more quote-unquote jail time than most American citizens ever will, right? Why? For publishing, right? Like, yeah, I get it. It's scary. AIs are scary. The $400 drones killing people in Ukraine is horrible. It's terrifying and it's scary, right? All these things are scary. Mass surveillance is scary. 1984 is scary. But if you really are logically consistent and you actually believe these things are coming and you're scared and you're a pessimist, you should go hide. Like, really, go hide, pray, take your family, take your loved ones, be a hermit. And I mean it. I'm not making fun of you. I'm just saying, that's what you should do. If you're an optimist, you should assume that, yes, the world's going to be horrible. Yes, there are going to be wars forever. Yes, there's going to be violence forever. Yes, there's going to be sin forever. We're in need of reconciliation with our maker. We're in need of saving, right? This world's broken. It's always going to be broken. But we have to live in the world, not of the world. We have to be in this world. We have to love other people in this world. We can't just go hide in a cave and wait until World War III AI CBDCs come kill us all with mini drones, right? We can't be afraid of that. We have to be optimists. We have to engage with the world and assume that the world may not last another 10 years, but we have to operate as if it's going to. And if it's going to, we should be saving money of that future world. Okay, the US dollar is not going to be around in the future world. Okay, the Argentinian peso is not going to be around in the future world. Okay, the currency from ancient Babylon is not here. The currency from ancient Rome is not here. And I got over there a replica. One of the oldest silver mines in all of Europe is, just an hour train ride away from here. I went to that silver mine. It was very interesting. Okay, that currency is not around, right? Like the currencies of old empires aren't around. And if you believe that the fiat monetary empires of today are not going to be around at some point in the future, you should probably begin divesting from those, right? Because you probably have a 100% exposure to the US dollar at this point, right? So if you're an optimist, you should buy Bitcoin for the long term, right? Now, there's another group too, are the naive people, and I will make fun of the naive people. If you're naive, if you're ignorant, if you don't know what you're doing, what you're going to do is you're going to buy the Bitcoin ETFs. Why? Because you want Bitcoin price exposure, right? I want my number to go up. I want more dollars, and I'm going to use Bitcoin via this counterparty risk tool to acquire more dollars because I'm a smart investor and I understand Bitcoin. No, you don't understand Bitcoin. Okay, Julian Assange back in 2010 wasn't talking about, oh, wow, Bitcoin's great, but we really need to wrap counterparty risk around this. Oh, that sounds lovely. Oh, yeah, Bitcoin's great and better than gold because we avert rehypothecation risk because gold is, since it's analog, you could have easy rehypothecation risk. Oh, yeah, we need to do that with Bitcoin. No, if you're buying Bitcoin and holding it, or at least the majority of it, in an ETF or on exchanges, you don't understand Bitcoin. You don't know what you're doing. And it's a matter of time until one of a few things happens. You're going to have some criminal steal it. They're going to log into your Venmo or to your Coinbase or to your whatever account and just withdraw it for you, take self-custody for you and steal your Bitcoin. Or eventually, large enough incentive on a long enough time horizon, the government's just going to take it. Okay? If you're buying Bitcoin ETF, probably, this is my opinion, you're actually probably buying it for the US government. You're not buying it for you. You're not buying it for your kids. The government's probably going to confiscate it. You might think I'm a conspiracy theorist. You might say I'm a fearmonger for talking about these things, but I do believe that's the case. If the American public buys 1 million Bitcoin and America someday wakes up and realizes, oh my goodness, if we want to continue being an empire in the future, we need a couple million Bitcoin now, but there's only 1 million Bitcoin left on the market. Oh, hey, let's auto-redeem all the ETF holders, all of their money in dollars right now and take their Bitcoin. Oh yeah, that sounds really smart. Like, you really don't think they're going to do that? Okay, do you really think the US government is going to go door to door of 1 million whole coiners in self-custody? Or do you think they're going to do one phone call and take 1 million Bitcoin via the ETF, which they already own via regulation, right? I mean, think about it, right? If you were buying the ETF for the price speculation of Bitcoin in terms of political currency units, you don't understand the importance of apolitical money. You don't understand why Julian Assange, why Adam Back, why Edward Snowden. You don't understand why all these people. Okay, my camera died on me, so I had to. Here we go. Okay. You get the point. You get what I'm trying to say, right? Hopefully you do, but it's important to keep this message in mind because a lot of people are going to be deceived into buying paper forms of Bitcoin. And, you know, that's fine. I get it. Like, you want to diversify, whatever. But understand what you're buying, okay? What you're buying is counterparty risk. You're buying a piece of paper. And yes, you'll get price exposure to Bitcoin for a time, but ultimately, give it a big enough incentive over a long time horizon. The more bullish you are on Bitcoin, the more unlikely this is, right? Bitcoin, the higher it goes, the faster it goes, the faster that incentive grows enough to where the government is going to take the Bitcoin, right? And like, people call me a fearmonger or being pessimistic for saying these things about the ETF. Oh, Luke, you're the scary guy because you don't like the ETF. The government's going to take it. Like, what more do you freaking people want? Okay, the U.S. government killed journalists and hid it. Okay, the U.S. government killed tens of thousands of people, civilians. Okay, the U.S. government looked the other way when we killed thousands of people that were surrendering, that were children, and there were other innocents in the Afghanistan and Iraq war. What, you think the government magically got more moral in the last 15 years? You think we got a backbone in the last decade or so? Like, do you understand that until mere hours ago, Julian Assange was wanting to be extradited by the U.S. government under the Espionage Act, despite him not being an American citizen? Oh, but you're going to trust the ETF. Okay, I see how it is. So you don't think it's possible the United States government is going to just say, oh, yeah, we took your Bitcoin, but don't worry, we gave you cash back. You have $100,000 of Bitcoin? Okay, yeah, you have $100,000 in your retirement fund now, but we took the Bitcoin because we wanted the Bitcoin for the sake of national security interests. Kind of like the same way that we're gonna, overcome free speech and, censor Julian Assange in the name of national security interests, right? We need the Bitcoin. We need all those Bitcoins. We need those Bitcoins that you bought. Yeah, you brought up Bitcoin by a factor of 10, but we just took it. Yeah, we just took it. We needed it. But you got your dollars. Don't worry. You can buy back at spot price now if you want. You'll have to take that cash out of your 401k, which, ooh, shoot, that's a 30% fee there. Oh, yeah, you're also going to pay tax on that. Oh, and by the way, Bitcoin price is skyrocketing because we just bought 1 million Bitcoin and didn't have to pay spot for it. And oh, now we're printing money and issuing bonds to buy the rest of the Bitcoin. Oh, sorry. Yeah, we gave you your cash back. We didn't steal your Bitcoin. We didn't take your Bitcoin. We just gave you the cash. Okay, we just auto force converted your Bitcoin ETF into cash. You got the cash now. You're gonna have to pay that tax fee if you really want to withdraw it from your ETF. If you want to really withdraw it from your retirement fund, you can do that, but you're gonna have to pay that fee now. Oh, now you have to compete with everyone else also competing against you to get that Bitcoin. Like, people, if you're buying the ETF and holding ETF, and you don't think these things are likely, my friend, you're ignorant. You're willingly ignorant and naive, and you've not watched any of this video up until now. Like, the whole point of Bitcoin is a political money. And if you're introducing the political element back into Bitcoin, you should not be surprised when politicians do political things and they take your Bitcoin, right? And it's important to note, I am not a conspiracy theorist. Nothing I have said in this video is a conspiracy theory. Nothing I have said in this video is some dark web making things up, trying to tie things together, aren't tied together. These are all facts. Julian Assange is a person. Julian Assange said these things. These things were leaked, okay? These things are real. The government actually killed these people. The government actually hid these things. The government actually did these things to Assange. We actually considered assassinating him. We actually did these things I'm describing to you. I'm not a conspiracy theorist. Everything I've been saying is fact. And if something is wrong in a video, it's because a fact I said was not true. It is objectively not true. Not because it's some opinion I just made it up, right? I'm not making this up about the ETFs. And if you're watching this, you might think, Luke, how on earth are people still buying ETF? Because I'm already in self-custody. I'm good to go. A lot of you aren't. And I know you aren't. And if you think naively you're going to be fine ETF or the odds are in your favor, tell that to Julian Assange. Tell that to Edward Snowden. Tell that to Ross Ulbricht. Tell that to literally anybody that's been in Bitcoin longer than you, right? Come on. think, people, okay? I've not made any large leaps here in claims. I am not claiming to have insider information. I am simply stating the facts of Assange's story and reminding you why you should not trust the American government with your US dollars and why you should not trust the American government with your US dollar Bitcoin quasi-backed ETF, right? The US dollars in your bank account are of American political interest. Your Bitcoin and your ETF are of American political interest, right? It's a crazy story, the Assange story. You don't have to make any large leaps, right? This is not a fringe conspiracy theory to believe the US government will continue debasing your political currency units, right? This is what they're going to do. This is their fact. They're going to debase it at least at 2% a year, right? It is not crazy to believe these things. It is not crazy to believe it's inevitable on a long enough time horizon that your Bitcoin ETF equals confiscated or force redeemed Bitcoin, right? Oh, they won't steal it because we're not communists. They'll just force redeem it for you, right? These things are not crazy, and yet I continue to be told I'm crazy. Oh, Luke, you're crazy. Oh, Luke, you're a fearmonger. Oh, Luke, you're nuts. Whatever. I'm making these videos to warn you people of this, right? The U.S. already did this with gold twice. We already confiscated gold from people twice. It was illegal to own gold or the paper that was the gold certificates when we were back on the gold standard. It was illegal to own former U.S. money for half a century until we finally made it legal as a collector's item, right? And yet we're just like, we just completely walked into this NSA CIA mass surveillance state where you just say, oh, everything's fine. I'm opting out the system because I got my Bitcoin ETF. Woohoo! Oh my gosh. Okay, we did this with alcohol. You remember Prohibition? Oh no, you were probably too young, actually. Actually, all of us are too young. None of us remember Prohibition. But oh yeah, by the way, we made America's most popular drink illegal for like a decade. You don't think America's going to make owning, you think America's going to make owning Bitcoin easy? I mean, even if they'll never make self-custody illegal, even if they never do that, they'll make owning an ETF illegal. They'll just take it. They don't have to make Bitcoin illegal. In fact, they want Bitcoin to be legal so more people with Bitcoin will come to America, but they'll sell you all these securities and counterparty risk products called the ETFs so they can take your Bitcoin, right? Also, by the way, before the US dollar, there were two hyperinflations on American soil, not including the colonial monies from before the foundation of America, right? Yeah, you include those, it's a lot more than two, right? Oh, by the way, we had two central banks before the Federal Reserve's creation in 1913. Oh, you didn't know that? Surprise, surprise. And oh, by the way, the current US dollar, not one of the two that hyperinflated on US soil, and not the currencies of the colonies before the foundation of America. Oh, by the way, the current US dollar has had our national debt increase by a factor of 800,000x in the last 250 years or so. Okay, none of these things I'm saying as hyperbole. These are all facts. These are all true. I'm saying these things over and over and over, and people are not listening because they're procrastinating on Bitcoin. They're procrastinating on self-custody. They still have Bitcoin on exchanges, and they are not listening, okay? If the U.S. can do these things to Julian Assange today, okay, and only today, literally today, for the first time, Julian Assange is going home, what do you think is going to happen if you own Bitcoin on an exchange or in an ETF, okay? What has been stated today is not conspiracy theory or a rumor. Verify for yourself, okay? There's no need to do anything more dramatic, right? So, let's get to the actual part. Let's get to the part nobody wants to hear about, but everyone needs to think about, is how to be a little bit paranoid with your Bitcoin, okay? Self-custody Bitcoin is the way. Do self-custody. It is important because you remove all counterparty risk and rehypothecation risk, which is precisely the point of Bitcoin. Now, why do most people procrastinate or avoid self-custody Bitcoin? It's because they're scared. I get it. It's scary to do something new. It's scary to learn something new that's technical. But you don't have to do everything at once. You can start slow and steady. You can take your time. And of course, the thing that I always talk about is collateral custody multisig. Why? Because you get all the benefits of self-custody, no rehypothecation risk, no counterparty risk, without having to have all 100% of your net worth dependent on if you can remember a password or not, or dependent on making a single error, right? This is the beauty of multisig, is that you have multiple redundancies. You can reduce single points of failure. Most multisig vaults have reduced some points of failure. The one that I'm advocating for reduces all single points of failure. Okay, so this is what I do personally. Okay, I'm just saying what I do personally. Okay, what I do personally is I have multiple self-custody arrangements. Okay, I don't have all my eggs in one basket. All right, most of you watching, you probably have all your Bitcoin in one single sig, on one ledger device, on one Trezor, or on one cold card Bitbox, for whatever it is. Most of you have it all in your head, or you have it all in your safety deposit box, or you have it all in one place. I'm telling you, that's probably not a good idea. And if you need me to tell you that, you're probably pretty behind, frankly. Like, it should be self-evident to you that if you own multiple Bitcoin and there's only 50,000 or so Satoshis per human being, oh yeah, if I have 1,000 times more Bitcoin than the average person is going to have in the future, I should probably have at least 2 self-custody arrangements. At least 2. Come on, people. This is bare minimum stuff, okay? The one primary one I advocate for, especially for people that are newer or for people that want Bitcoin in their retirement accounts, because you can own self-custody Bitcoin in retirement accounts. Okay, the primary one I recommend for those situations is collateral custody multisig with jurisdictional arbitrage. I'm really going to emphasize this point for this video because it's very related to the Julian Assange story, okay? Having Bitcoin keys in multiple countries without single points of failure means that when it comes to lawsuit, litigation, a government 6102 attack, or a $5 wrench attack, your Bitcoin is secure. Okay, let's take me as an example. I'm being fully transparent here. I've got multiple setups. This is one of my setups. I have keys to my Bitcoin vault in 3 different countries right now. Okay, and that means that right now on my little apartment door, if the government was to come in and demand me hand over my Bitcoin keys, I'd say, okay, here's one. Enjoy the wild goose chase of the other 2, because the other 2 are geographically distributed. They're around the world, and they can move jurisdictions in the matter of 10 minutes or so. The Bitcoin is here, but it's also nowhere, and that's the beauty of Bitcoin. You can't do this with real estate. You can't do this with stocks. You can't do this with ETF Bitcoin, and you cannot do this with single sig, and you cannot do this with self-directed multi-sig. Or at least you can theoretically, but it's extremely expensive, and you definitely cannot do it in a matter of minutes. It might take you weeks to set it up, right? But in a matter of minutes, I can move my keys to a different country if I wanted to. If I was doing some other thing, if I was flying to different countries and burying single seed phrases and, you know, backyards, places, or under rocks somewhere, like that just doesn't work as well, right? And at the end, I'm still the only one memorizing the routes to all those seed phrases, so I'm still a single point of failure. My point is, reduce single points of failure to 0, including yourself and including the country you're in. Because if you are the single point of failure and your government comes for you, or your government comes through your wife to you, or your kids to you, they're going to get you, and you're going to be the new single point of failure. They're willingly doing this to Julian Assange. They're going to be willing to do it to you if the incentive is large enough. I'm an optimist. I don't think the incentive is large enough for you. For Julian Assange's case, it was, okay? And for you, potentially, at some point, it could be, right? So with the Bitcoin being both everywhere and nowhere at once, via a multi-sig with jurisdictional arbitrage, fully within the law, by the way, fully legal, fully regulated, nothing sketchy, nothing, illegal. Like Bitcoin Advisor, we've been helping clients with these kinds of questions since 2016, okay? Like, this is nothing new, right? We've been helping people think these things through with key agency distributed around the world, matter of minutes. I already talked about all that, right? Okay, the link is in the description below. If you want to learn more about this, if you want to own Bitcoin in your IRA, if you want to own Bitcoin in your super fund, if you want to create a trust with Bitcoin, if you want to have tax advantage Bitcoin, all these things, link in the description below. Or most appropriate for today's discussion of Julian Assange is, if you want your Bitcoin, if you at least want a portion of your Bitcoin to have jurisdictional arbitrage, you should probably consider this, because this is an important diversification for you to have. In the case that you're traveling for leisure, like I am right now, I'm traveling the world for leisure right now, well, / for work, mainly for work. But like, it doesn't matter if you're fleeing the country from a fear-mongering perspective, or if you're just enjoying the world and you want to travel the world, like whatever the case, this is a useful thing you should probably consider instead of having all of your Bitcoin in one basket, right? I just don't think that's wise, okay? And this graphic here explains what I'm talking about here, right? So in the sake of this graphic, all the Bitcoin in this theoretical vault, 1 key in the United States, 1 key in Canada, 1 key in Australia. This is not what I'm saying I have personally, right? I'm just using this as an example. But let's say those are the 3 you have. That means if Australia were to come after me, Luke Broyles, they can't get my Bitcoin because the other 2 keys are in these other countries. Oh, hey, Australian authorities, you're going to have to go to America and go through the American court system and convince them to also give up one of the keys. And oh, by the way, if that's going to take you more than 10 minutes, in this time, I'm going to move that key to Vietnam. Oh, and if you go to Vietnam, I'm going to move that key to Taiwan. I'm going to move that key to the UK or somewhere else, right? Basically, it's giant whack-a-mole. Basically, with this kind of vault, without this jurisdictional single point of failure, you are creating this quasi-whack-a-mole with your keys that, fully within the system. You're fully regulated. It's fully legitimate, right? You're not going to be labeled a money launderer or having funds move internationally, some blacklisted thing, or it's fully legitimate way you can avoid being a target. Okay. Oh, but what about this risk? What about that risk? Okay, compare what I just described to the ETF risk. With ETF, all of your Bitcoin has rehypothecation risk, has counterparty risk, and it's in one country. Okay, with this setup, with the multi-sig vault, with keys in 3 different countries spread across the world that can move instantaneously in a matter of minutes, depending on where you think your risk is. Okay, why do you think the people that are signing up with me, the link in below for the Bitcoin Advisor, why do you think most people coming are because they're concerned about lawsuit risk, right? It's like, hey, you're a rich person, you've got a few Bitcoin, or maybe a few Bitcoin isn't worth that much now, but in 5 years it's worth a lot more. Like, what happens when people want to sue you? Because people are just sue happy. Like, oh, I think Jim Bob's got a lot of Bitcoin. I think he was early to Bitcoin. I think he bought Bitcoin before it was $1 million. Let's sue him, right? What are you going to do? You're going to have all your Bitcoin in an ETF, or you're going to have some of your Bitcoin in a multi-sig vault with keys in different countries, so that now they don't have to sue you in just one country, but they have to sue you in multiple countries and go through the litigation and multiple. Like, why would they do that? Why, me as a criminal, why would I try to hack you with your keys in multiple countries when I can just go after the low-hanging fruit of the people with hot wallets and single sig wallets, everything in one honeypot? It's like, come on, people. That's great. Like, if I'm the bad guy, I'm the scammer, I'm going to do that, right? If I'm the sue-happy person that's going to throw a lawsuit at early OG Bitcoiners, why would I go after the person with a multi-sig with jurisdictional legal arbitrage? I'll just go after the person with a single sig stuffed in their bedroom house, right? If I just, break into their house and find their 12 words, great, I get their Bitcoin. If I'm not that violent, but I just leverage the courts and the legal system to go after them, great, I'll just take it that way, right? I mean, all of these things are important considerations to have, but of course, the one that's most relevant to the discussion of Julian Assange is what happens if you have to flee the country? What happens if you're not fleeing the country, but you just don't want to live in the country anymore, right? All of a sudden, now you have to have all your money leave, and pay massive tax gains on your on the money in your retirement funds, right? Like, all of a sudden, a lot of questions come up that how do you do these things legally, ethically, and also safely and securely on chain? And I genuinely believe this is the way to do it. This is exactly what I do, right? So that's my point. That's my rant. If that interests you, the link's in the description below. I think this is really important. I think it's really critical. And I think this is going to be in massive demand, okay? People a year ago were saying, Luke, nobody's going to want cloud custody multi-sig. Why would I want that? It's too complicated. Okay, 5 years ago, there were 6 of us at Bitcoin Advisor. Now there's 40, okay? And I think there's going to be a lot more a year from now. And, oh yeah, by the way, the next wave of adoption are going to be the millionaires, are going to be the business owners, and the people that want this anyway. So that's just my encouragement, is that if you got 2 Bitcoin and you want 1 Bitcoin and a single sig you're going to memorize where your head's a single point of failure, and the other 1 Bitcoin you want a setup like this where it's geographically everywhere, nowhere at once, like, I don't think it's a bad idea. If you want to put all your Bitcoin in one or the other, you can go for it. But whatever you do, please don't have Bitcoin on exchanges or in the ETFs, and please avoid having single points of failure for your Bitcoin self-custody, right? If you have your Bitcoin on an exchange or the ETF, I hope Julian Assange's story is a wake-up call to you. The government killed journalists and hid it. The government killed innocent civilians, they killed children, they killed people that were surrendering, and they hid it. And when it was exposed, they leveraged the Espionage Act to indirectly imprison somebody on foreign soil, an embassy, for over a decade without a fair trial. They did it with Julian Assange, they did it with Ross Ulbricht, they did it with Edward Snowden, and they were going to do it again and again and again, as long as the incentive is there. So the best thing you can do is reduce the incentive, and this is the most important thing. Maybe the ETF is good forever. Maybe the ETF never goes wrong. Maybe it's all fine because the government magically is moral now, and we're living in our little cloud world. But reduce the incentive, and then they're not going to do it, right? The better thing to do than to have a solution to a problem is to reduce the incentive of the problem originating in the first place. That's why I'm such an advocate for this kind of jurisdictional arbitrage. Because if you are geographically and jurisdictionally independent, and your Bitcoin is jurisdictionally independent, all of a sudden, the incentive for someone, whether that's a criminal on an individual level or a government on a nation state level, to come after you dramatically plummets. Not to zero, but very, very close to zero, okay? If you have all of your Bitcoin keys or eggs in one basket, I think that's a risk you probably should not be tolerating. If all of your keys, all of your Bitcoin is in your head, or it's in the drawer right next to your bed, or it's buried in your backyard somewhere, or you've made a little treasure map to give to your wife in case you die, or you've given it all to your lawyer, all of those things, those are massive single points of failure. And either probably someone's going to screw it up, someone's going to lose it, some criminal's going to find it, or the government, in the worst case, is going to take it. And even if the government is the smallest chance of all of those, and I do believe is the smallest chance of all of those, Julian Assange's story is an example that even that risk is entirely possible. Okay, safety deposit box is another example. I don't know why people keep their Bitcoin seed phrases in safety deposit boxes. Whatever you do, I encourage you, consider some sort of jurisdictional arbitrage with your Bitcoin. And the way to do that, the only way to do that I've seen, is collateral custody multi-sig. And the company that's been doing that the longest is the Bitcoin Advisor. The company I work at is the Bitcoin Advisor. Yes, I'm biased towards the Bitcoin Advisor, but there's a reason I joined there and not the other companies. There was a very specific, particular reason, and this is one of those reasons why, okay? I'm a little paranoid, maybe. I'm an optimist at heart. Hopefully you know that and see that from this video and the other videos I've done. But being a little paranoid now is far superior to being very panicked down the line, okay? I would rather be a little paranoid now and get it done instead of me procrastinating forever and then all of a sudden, when it hits the fan, panic, okay? Julian Assange was a little paranoid, and he dressed as a motorcyclist with a rock in his shoe to go hide in the Ecuadorian embassy in London. Okay, are you really going to criticize him because he was paranoid? Really? Maybe people were watching him that day when he went in, and he snuck by him. Maybe not. But whatever the case, I think he was probably pretty glad that he at least made it to the embassy, so he at least had some freedom of movement and not being in isolation. If he didn't make it to the embassy, he probably would have been in an isolation chamber for years longer than he already was. Okay, Julian Assange was a little paranoid and did the right thing and got to the freaking embassy when there was still time. And that's my encouragement for your Bitcoin. Be a little paranoid, take some percentage of your Bitcoin stack and get it in some sort of jurisdictional arbitrage multi-sig vault. Okay, I don't care how you do it. I think once you try to do it, you're going to figure out that Bitcoin Advisor is the best way to do it. But take yourself, get to the Ecuadorian embassy, get at least a little exposure to it. Maybe you never need it, and that's okay. But just in case you do, it's already there, and you don't have to panic. That is my encouragement. That is my point. If you're interested in that, you can message me in the link down below. Contact me, the Bitcoin Advisor, all the stuff. I mean, this is exactly what I do. People ask me all the time, Luke, what do you do? This is what I do. Oh, that sounds complicated. That sounds this, that, that. Okay, I'm telling you what I do. This is what I do. So that's my point of the video today. I've been rambling on for over an hour now. Maybe Julian Assange has landed in Australia. I think it's a little too soon. He'll probably be there by the time the video is uploaded. But whatever the case, congrats, Julian Assange. Congrats to Stella Assange, who again was here in Prague just barely a week ago. I'm very happy for your family. I'm very happy for everything going on with that. I hope and pray everything goes well. And most importantly, I hope that this example of freedom triumphing over fear-mongering and censorship continues in the future, and that our paranoia just turns out to be that, paranoia. But in the case it's not, please buy Bitcoin, get off zero, don't trust American political currency, don't trust the ETF, upgrade your Bitcoin self-custody, and wait. And with that, you'll sleep like a baby. I sleep like a baby, knowing that my Bitcoin's secure. So anyway, link in description. Please subscribe and like if you like this video. Algorithm is not going to push this video because, frankly, it's about a topic about human rights and about freedom of speech. And most people, anyway, anymore these days, don't really care about that. So don't be like most people. Don't procrastinate. Take action.